Hello and welcome to the Medical Sales Podcast, and I am your host, Samuel. In this podcast, I interview top medical sales reps and leading medical sales executives across the entire country. And it doesn't matter what medical sales industry, from medical device to pharmaceutical to genetic testing to diagnostic lab, you name it, you will learn how to either break into the industry, be a top 5% performer within your role in sales, or climb the corporate ladder. Welcome to the Medical Sales Podcast. Hello and welcome to the Medical Sales Podcast. Today we have with us Terry Coutsolioutsos. Now, Terry is a fascinating guest to listen to because not only is he a great speaker, but he's the Senior Vice President for Sales Operations, Marketing, and Communications for Siemens Healthineers. He really brings a unique perspective because his role is really on the front lines of transformation when it comes to the medical device sales space. And he has such a wealth of experience from where he started all the way to where he is today. And when you hear about the story of someone that really grinded their way through, up all the way to the top, Terry is the kind of person you want to hear from. This is actually going to be a multiple-part interview because we had a lot of fun. We got into a lot of conversation, and we covered quite a bit. So this is part one that you're going to hear today. And as always, thank you for listening to the Medical Sales Podcast, and I really do hope you enjoy this interview. Hey, Terry, how are you doing today?
Samuel, good to see you.
You too. So, I'm excited today because we have a guest with us, Terry Coutsolioutsos, and he's had an amazing career. He's done some amazing things, and he's finally here to talk with us today. So, Terry, before I say any more, I'm going to let you go ahead and talk about who you are and what you do.
My name is Terry Coutsolioutsos. I head up marketing, sales operations, and communications for Siemens Healthineers in North America. And it's a really great group that is going through a tremendous amount of change and offering a great value back to our commercial organization. So we are a centralized group. We're a shared service group, and we support about 12 or 1,300 sellers and marketers.
Wow. So, Terry, you got to take us back because you're at a pretty high level in your company, and everybody wants to know, how it is you got there and where it is you started. So take us back to college. Did you go to college saying, I want to be the senior vice president for Siemens Healthineers one day, or what was the mind and what were you actually working on coming out of college?
Yeah, well, going back to college, I'm glad I actually lived through college and I made it through in 4 years. But no, I did not go to college to become, a medical device or medical sales representative or an executive. I actually went to college, Wittenberg University in Springfield, Ohio.
Sure.
A great liberal arts school. But my goal back then was to go into banking and finance. I wanted to be a trader on Wall Street.
Oh, wow.
And,
Okay.
And I'll take you back. I graduated in the late 80s. And for those of you that are old enough, there was a major market crash in 1987. And so I was graduating right after that. So they weren't hiring anybody in Wall Street. They were laying everybody off. So my first job out of college was actually in banking. And I went into the typical 3-year rotational program where you do a little bit of commercial, you do a little bit of retail, and you learn how to become a commercial banker.
Okay. So then, wow, that's quite a start. Now, what happened to even introduce the healthcare sales world to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I think back then, and I got to give you a lot of credit because you provide a channel for people who are trying to get into medical sales and become a medical sales professional. So kudos to you.
Thank you, Terry. Appreciate it.
People like you didn't exist, back in the late 80s when I was trying to get into medical sales. I was just a college graduate that had spent 3 years early in the banking industry that realized he didn't want to be a banker. And that's all I knew, right? And I was fortunate enough to have a great mentor that I worked for in the bank. And I had a few friends that I hung out with that were young professionals that were in the medical and the pharmaceutical space.
Sure.
And there were some tremendously interesting, disruptive things happening in the medical space when I wanted to get back into it. I don't know if, U.S. Surgical, which became a part of Covidien, which is now part of Medtronic, really was introducing, laparoscopic and endoscopic surgery.
Sure.
So that was a technology that was starting to take off in the early 90s. And I was I had two choices. I was either going to go into financial sales, and I actually had a job offer from Merrill Lynch.
Okay.
And then I had a job offer from Roche, and two birds in the hand within a couple of weeks. And I think it was just faith, because I went into the Merrill Lynch office to go spend a day, and I didn't have a great experience watching how that office worked.
Yeah.
And I ended up taking a job with Roche and moving to Chicago. And that's when my medical device career and technology for services and healthcare took off.
Wow. So you started with Roche, and that, that's something I hear more and more, that you had a couple people in your circle that were in this space that kind of introduced you to space, which makes sense. So you started with Roche, and then I see that you went to work for Pfizer. So
Yeah.
how long were you actually a pharmaceutical sales rep?
Well, I wasn't even actually a pharmaceutical sales rep, actually.
Okay.
So I'll tell you what kind of happened. So my first job with Roche, I sold laboratory testing services, and I did this in Chicago. And this was the days before LabCorp and Quest,
right.
And the lab service company would come by and pick up the specimens from the office, and they would go back and test it, and then they would send you either the results by fax, or they had these little modem printers that would be in your office, and they would send the results back. But this was a job where you would literally knock on 40 or 50 doors a day. Okay, so this is like copier, kind of commodity kind of sales type of stuff, where your whole goal that day was to get 2 or 3 appointments scheduled to come back and actually have a real conversation. And so, I would consider that was a real school of hard knocks.
Sure.
And then after Roche, again, kind of talking about this circle, when I lived in Chicago, my next door neighbor was a recruiter for the healthcare space.
Okay.
And he was recruiting for a company called Circon ACMI, which became a part of, Gyrus, which was in the laparoscopic endoscopic business. And that was the first, what I would consider, real sort of transformational sales role that I had, because laparoscopic surgery was just beginning to emerge. And this is when we were taking gallbladders out with scopes and 3 or 4 holes and trocars in the body, and you were not opening people up for surgery anymore. So, and I was a technical service representative, and I serviced about 8 or 9 account executives in the Midwest. So I had like Iowa and Chicago and Nebraska. And, I was the guy that they would go sit into a hospital for a week just to sit there and babysit a demo in their territories. And so I got a chance to do that. And then when I did that really well, I got promoted to become a sales. I got my own territory, and I moved to New Jersey, where, and this was a role where it was 100% commission. So the only thing the company gave you was a commission check and the ability to buy health insurance. Wow. All the expenses were on your own. If you spent dollars investing in a doctor to go take them out or take them to a conference, it was out of your own pocket. Mm-hmm. And so it was a really interesting opportunity. It was a great learning experience for me as sort of a business owner. Right. And it's those are skills that every day when you're spending your own money, that even today when I'm running a budget of multi millions of dollars, I still feel like I'm spending my own money, because I can remember and go back to those days in New Jersey and New York City when I was the account owner and spending my own money on my own business. And I still carry that mentality through with me wherever I go.
Right. And I'm sure it served you. I mean, and then not just that, but I mean, I'm sure, the grit and the grind that we've talked about before, that's just reinforced when you're 1099 and you got to kind of spend for yourself.
1099 in it the whole way, man. It's just a commission check. And, and I think, back then that was in my single days, and I wasn't, wasn't married, didn't have a family, and, I could move to Chicago and I could move to New York and, kind of have that kind of, free lifestyle that you could pack everything you own in the back of a U-Haul truck and, drag it across the country and, pretty much start your life right over again. It was kind of fun.
Now this was with Boston Scientific.
No, that was with Roche first in Chicago, and then with Circon ACMI, which became Gyrus Olympus. Okay. And I did that here in New Jersey. And then from there, it's funny, I was sitting there with my job with Circon ACMI, and I was sitting in the Marriott lobby at LaGuardia. And I remember this guy, his name was John Oakes, and he worked for a division of Pfizer. It was called Schneider. And it was one of the first endoscopic stents ever. And he was like playing around with this thing. And I'm curious in nature. And I'm like, so what's this?
Right.
He's like, well, this is a stent. And I'm like, what's a stent? And little did I know that, that conversation turned into me walking into a business that started off at $0, that today, when you look at the endovascular and the cardiovascular stenting business, it's probably a $10 billion marketplace worldwide. And back then, when I was touching and feeling this thing at the LaGuardia airport, it was literally a $0 market. And so he and I developed a relationship and had a couple conversations. And about 3 or 4 months later, I was working for Pfizer in a division called Schneider, which was then bought by Boston Scientific, by the way, that we're selling this thing called the wall stent. So it's fun.
Wow. Okay. So that's a pretty organic move then. So Boston Scientific buys that division of Pfizer. And I'm assuming you just kind of rolled right in with Boston Scientific then, because you were doing the good job you were doing.
Well, I did for a while. And then, there was a company called Guidant, which also had another stent. And I actually left Boston Scientific to go work for a company called Guidant that had the first cardiovascular stents in the marketplace.
What inspired that move?
It was a new disruptive, I went from selling stents for the body, for the legs, right? And there was a new thing that they were developing stents for the heart. And so I went from selling cardiovascular products for the heart to cardiovascular products for the legs to the heart. And I went to work for a company called Guidant, which is another long story because Boston Scientific bought us about 5 or 6 years after that as well. So I've actually worked for a couple of companies that Boston Scientific has
they
acquired at different times, right?
Yeah.
And so, I started working for Pfizer, selling the wall stent, and got married in that time frame too. So there's a lot of personal change in there. Boston Scientific bought Schneider. I then went to work for Guidant. And it was funny, after that acquisition, my wife and I said, hey, everybody waits till they retire to move to Florida. And I didn't realize I was unemployed after the acquisition. And we just kind of packed up a truck and went to Florida, and I ended up getting a job with Guidant, and I opened up one of their first territories in Florida, and that was a lot of fun.
Okay, so then after Guidant, what happened next? You're in Florida now. You're working for Guidant.
Working for Guidant, and just to kind of I've been carrying a bag at this point probably for close to 10 years. We're probably, close to 2001, I think, and I think I had just about every conversation you can have with a physician about the product. And I can remember, going out every day. And by the way, some of the most fun I've ever had was working for Guidant. It was just one of those disruptive, transformational times in healthcare, and really successful time frame. And everybody was just having a lot of fun. But I remember sitting there, and I could, with an 80% sense of accuracy, I could start talking to physicians and start talking about my product. And I was starting to even predict their objections before it even came out of their mouth, right? And I was doing some field sales training, and I was bringing new hires on, and I was like, all right, this isn't challenging anymore for me. Because I was like, all right, I'm going to say this, and the doctor's going to say this, and then I'm going to say that, and then we're going to come back. And it was almost like we were predicting the whole thing, right? So, and I felt like at that point I wanted to do more, right? And I was starting to do some, field training and mentoring for new hires, and that was sort of inspirational for me. And I thought the next step was to go into sales management, right? And so I wanted to get into sales management, and Guidant said, we think you'd be a great manager and a great leader one day. And I said, that's super. And so when can I start? And they said, well, we want you to go do a development rotational role. And I'm like, well, what's that? Right.
Right.
And this was a really good philosophy by this company, is that they really developed talent, and people would go up, but they also wanted people to go sideways. And so I had an opportunity to go work for a guy named Ernie Edwards, and he took a chance on me, and he brought me in as an investment, bringing a salesperson into marketing. So I left Florida. I went out to Santa Clara, California to do a marketing rotation. And it was a phenomenal experience for me because when you're a sales professional and you're in your territory, that's pretty much the only thing you know. Like it's like heads down, here's my number, here's my customers, here's my product, and I'm just going to go bang it out every day. The rest of the world around you sometimes doesn't exist, right?
Right.
And so it really gave me an opportunity to really see how, what marketing was, what running a company is, what collaboration inside of a company looks like. And it was a wonderful, learning development opportunity for me. And I think that that's something that I'll always, always cherish.
Now, so this is great to hear. The fact that you were carrying the bag for 10 years, the fact that you realized that you no longer wanted to be siloed, you needed to get access to more of what was going on, and because you want to provide more value. When people that are in the field right now listen to this, what would you advise them to really get in front of?
I think a couple things. You have to be self-reflective, right? I think you have to become a sales leader or a manager. It's something you really got to want. And I'll just tell you, be careful what you ask for.
Right.
Because you have to have a really severe passion with people and helping other people be successful, right? And most, a lot of great sales professionals, they're great in their own world and in their own mind, right? And they're kingdoms of that part, and they love that.
Right.
And there's a place for that in every sales organization. We always need great sellers who are also, field ambassadors and field leaders, but sometimes they're not necessarily built and wired or capable of actually leading others for success. Right? Sometimes your best sellers don't necessarily equal your best sales leaders, right? And so the first thing I would suggest you do is really reflect on yourself. Do you want your next role to be about everybody else but you?
Right.
Because when you're a seller, it's about you and your customer. It's a pretty simple world, right? It's very two-dimensional. When you become a sales leader and a manager, all of a sudden you have people to please, your team, right? You have your boss to please, right? Your company and your organization. You have your customers to please, right? So all of a sudden you're getting more variables and more dynamics into your world that it's less about you and more about everybody else. And that was the one thing I think that, I really started to embrace and hone in on that, because I was that very focused sales representative who was focused on their customers and their territory. And I needed that new role to kind of broaden my vision and my perspective and my appreciation for what a sales leader does.
Got it. You say one thing that I just want to touch on. You say that when it comes to getting into leadership, you have to really reflect and then really assess if you're capable of doing it. Do you see that it's something that can be developed, or do you really just feel like, no, you're either that kind of person or you're not?
No, I think I think most skills can be learned. I mean, there's a lot of things that aren't me inside of me DNA that I've developed over time, because you recognize them. And then you actually have to work with somebody to develop conscious decision-making, conscious coaching, conscious activity into muscle memory, right? So first it becomes conscious. You have to remind yourself to do things. And then hopefully over time you do it enough that it becomes a subconscious thing. I would just say that there's a couple things. One is you got to want to do more. You got to raise your hand up. Engage with people who have done it before. Like, that's the other thing too, that I've always told people who've wanted to progress that have worked for me, is that when they want that next level job, start acting and doing that job today. Prove to that person who's going to hire you into that next level up, prove to them that like you selecting them for that job is not a risk, because you're already doing 70 or 80% of it already. Right. And I think those are the types of things that, you make it easy for yourself to step into those roles, because you start experimenting a little bit. You get a chance to say, well, I'll give you some examples when we've looked at high caliber talent, and we start as an organization looking at individual contributors and saying, okay, this person we believe has legitimate path and runway to do more from a leadership perspective. So we start putting them into leadership programs. We don't make them a leader and say, we hope you can do it, right? And sometimes that happens, right? But if you do it right, you kind of bring people in and you say, you put them through some leadership classes and you let them do some role playing. You let them learn how to do talent acquisition and do some interviewing. Like there are things that if you as a regional manager and you have somebody on your team that wants to do that role down the road, let them participate in, selection rounds for talent. Let them take on budget discussions. Let them take on somebody taking on a different role on a team that's leading a function inside of a regional sales meeting. Let them take things on and develop those skills and capabilities so they're confident. I mean, at the end of the day, just like I think confidence is such a huge part of anybody's role in success. I think if you lack confidence, the likelihood of success is nil. And there's different ways to get confidence, right? It's experiences, right? It's actually learning, like, didactically learning fundamental skills and concepts and processes. And, when people have those things underneath them and they start putting them together with action and experiencing some failure and some success, that just builds upon for the next role every single day. Like, I just think that that's just a good way to go. Yeah. So if you're out there and you want to do more, raise your hand to your boss and say, hey, what can I do to get myself ready for a role like you have? Or maybe it's not their role, but maybe it's another role over there, and say, see, Susan, that's a job I really want. I'm really passionate about that. How do I get there? Help me understand that. And if they're good leaders, they'll help you map that out. They'll help you create a pathway. They'll help provide experiences for you so that one day you'll be in a position that you'll deserve that opportunity.
So this makes me think of an issue that a lot of reps face that want to get into leadership at some point in their career. And it is that difficult manager. That's the best way I'll say it. Have you ever had that experience where you had a difficult manager and you really weren't sure how you're going to move the needle forward in light of their leadership?
So what do you mean by difficult managers? Somebody like, because that's a big word.
So I'll put it this way, because you're right. A lot of times it's the perspective of the sales rep. But I guess, have you ever just had a leader that was leading you and you just didn't get along? And you were thinking, how am I going to get things done?
Sure. I mean, everybody's had a boss like that. And I'm sure, people have said that about me too, right? But, I think that it's all about collaboration. Here's what I can just say at the end of the day, helps me as a leader. And I wish I would have known this, earlier in my career when I wasn't a leader as well. I think that, communication is such a key thing. And I think we're much better communicators today than we were 15 or 20 years ago when it comes to an organizational perspective. I think we as organizations are much more sensitive, are much more empathetic, are much more understanding today than we were 15 or 20 years ago when it was a very vertical in nature world. Like, there's a lot of different demographics in the workforce today. We have, we still have baby boomers in the workforce. We still have Gen Xers like me. We've got millennials and Ys and Zs, and it's probably the most diverse time in our lifetime, right? But I grew up with a boomer, Gen Xer, which was really pretty much more of a vertical, like, here's the message, and the message kind of goes downhill, like, Yeah. And today we listen more, and today we communicate more, and today we're more empathetic and understanding. And I think moving forward, people in today's workplace, should be seeing leaders and managers that listen more, that are looking out more, that have a perspective of work-life balance. Like, I never heard about work-life balance 10 years ago. That word didn't exist in the dictionary, right?
Right.
And today it's some of the main topics that I discuss with my team and my leaders is, pressure and our team's mental health and their happiness. And, nobody had any discussions about my mental happiness 20 years ago, So I think it's a pretty cool time for people to be in the workforce.
Makes sense.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I love the way you're addressing that.
But I think if you have a difficult leader, I think communication's key. Like being upfront and being honest, having honest conversations with your leader, but in listening too. I think both sides need to listen. It's, it's like, you use the mouth and the ears ratio, and us as sellers should be better skilled at listening than speaking. Right. And so I think it's about sharing perspectives, aligning on expectations. Right. I think that's something that we've done really well at Siemens Healthineers, what we call our people and leadership practices. It's about, my team can come back to me and say, I'm not comfortable with this goal or task or this time frame or this deadline or my budget. Now, I can still say I don't agree with you, right? And I can still say, that's what we have. But I do create a platform and an open door policy for our people to have that type of conversation, to give me feedback. I constantly am asking my team, how am I doing with you, right? Because I do have a tendency to fall on accountability for empathy. I've learned how to be a more empathetic leader by far, right? But my ground zero response is accountability, right? And so I constantly have to have I ask my team all the time, am I doing okay? Like, am I asking the right questions? Am I giving you what you need? Am I giving you enough space? Am I diving in and driving you when I need to drive you? Because leadership's a tough thing, right? Like some people in certain situations, need less direction, need less of you, right? They need, less involvement of you, stay away. Right. Some situations they need help, right? And they need you to remove barriers and obstacles and have conversations with other leaders or get more resources. And so you've really got to be close in contact with your people. And I would just say that, if you're having difficult leadership management relationships, it's just like any other relationship. Like if you want it, you got to work at it. Right. And if you don't, maybe you just make a decision to divorce that relationship and move on. Right.
Yeah. No, good. That's good. What was your last leadership position at Guidant?
My last leadership position at Guidant, I was a regional sales leader for our cardiac rhythm management group. So pacemakers and defibrillators. And it was a really dynamic business, big sales organization, massive organization. I think I had $30 or $40 million region. I had 18 sales and clinical support people reporting into me. And that was a, really dynamic, hardworking, highly committed group, and very patient oriented. Like these were people that literally these devices, and I'm not exaggerating, but these devices literally save patients' lives every day. Right. Yeah. When you have a pacemaker, an internal defibrillator that shocks somebody's heart back into, a normal sinus rhythm when it was in a lethal one, 2 minutes before. Kind of tearjerker stuff where patients would tell you that they're in the grocery store and they felt out of breath and dizzy. And then the device, when it recognizes it, it'll start beeping, and it'll start beeping out of your chest. So it warns them. Right. And then it literally shocks, the heart. And they said it feels like a horse kicked you in the chest, and then they wake up. But the kind of stuff, when you listen to it, it brings tears to your eyes, because the whole family's there. And that if that device was not in the chest of that patient, they'd be in the ground the next day.
And that was Terry Coutsolioutsos. What I love about listening to Terry is how he was able to leverage all of his experiences into new roles because of his natural born curiosity. And whenever he got into a role, he would actually get very curious about what he was selling, what he was doing, and want to understand it, and want to understand where that device was going, where it was headed, and the plans for that device, and then put himself in a position to work in an environment when they're in the front of it. And it's a great way to lead your career, and we talk about it in this interview. So I want to remind you all that these interviews that you're hearing from Terry, this was actually part 1. Next week we're going to have a part 2, and there's actually going to be a part 3. And as you heard today, part 1 is mostly about his career and his experiences to get him to where he is today. Part 2 is going to be a little bit about that, but then we're going to talk more about leadership and transformation. Now, what do I mean by transformation? Let's think about his role. He's Senior Vice President of Sales Operations, Marketing, and Communications for Siemens Healthineers. So his role is responsible for getting in front of all the changes that are happening as far as the buying experience with customers and what Siemens need to do to make sure that experience is great. And, of course, in a role like that, there's a lot to talk about around change. And with what we've all experienced with COVID, I mean, there's so much to get to cover, and there's so much to go over. And we're going to do all of that in part 2 and part 3. So make sure you come back for those episodes. Now, if you're listening to this and you're thinking to yourself, you know what? I want to work in this space. I want to be in medical device sales. Or maybe you want to be in pharmaceutical sales or genetic testing sales or biotech sales. Well, then you need to make sure you visit evolveyoursuccess.com and get in touch with us. Click Attain a Medical Sales Role and follow the prompts, or find us on LinkedIn and look for Samuel Adeyinka, send a connection message or a text, and have a discussion with us, and we're going to introduce you to an opportunity that can completely change the game for you. We have a program that has helped so many place them in the right positions within medical device sales companies, pharmaceutical companies, genetic testing companies, and so on in the medical sales space. And if you're someone that's maybe you're a sales rep or you're a sales leader and you have a team that you really want to take to the next level, and you're trying to understand better ways to get in front of your customers, get access to your customers, and grow the business, then again, reach out to us. Go to evolveyoursuccess.com, see improved sales performance, or find me on LinkedIn, Samuel Adeyinka. Send a connection message or a text, and one of our client specialists will get with you and have a great discussion about what we can do to get your team to the next level or get you to the next level. As always, we do our best to bring you excellent guests that have fascinating stories, and we give you insights into their careers, what they're doing, how they're doing it, and how you can do the same. So make sure you come in and tune in next week for another episode, and thank you for listening to the Medical Sales Podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And remember, I have a couple programs that show you exactly how to break into the medical sales industry, become a top-performing medical sales professional, and also how to masterfully navigate your career to executive level leadership. Check out these programs and learn more at evolveyoursuccess.com. Stay tuned for more awesome content with amazing interviews.